Hello everybody, it's Kaihen. I hope you're all having a wonderful day, and if you're not, you're in the right place. Kick back, because here we talk about anime. And today we're talking about ReZero. Now most people I know would say they choose Rem over Ram for a waifu choice any day of the week, whether they've seen ReZero or not. And to that I say, who's Rem? But on a more serious note, who do you think makes a better waifu? The blue-haired yandere maid or the pink-haired, more stoic maid? If you're simping the blue-haired yandere maid right now, let me tell you why you are not only basic, but subjectively wrong from a logical perspective. Do you remember the story of the red ogre who cried? It's a Japanese folktale designed to teach us a lesson about caring for and valuing the friends that care for you for who you are. As a story that predates the ReZero story considerably, it's a folktale from Japan, I'd like to address that I believe the character arcs of Rem and Ram are largely based around the central theme of the Red Ogre Who Cried. As children, Ram was overwhelmingly powerful for her age and loved by her clan, whereas Rem was more of an anomaly and considered to be weak, subjected to criticism for being different and weaker. Now, Rem was very jealous of Ram for her power and her affection that she was given by the village, so she decided that she would become the best she could possibly be at the things she could do, and that's exactly what Ram did. She became amazing at house cleaning and cooking, which explains why in current day we know her as the better maid, because she developed all these skills in a way to try to kind of equivalent herself to her sister, who had much more inborn talent. Even though Rem was considered a misfit, Ram loved Rem more than anything, and that was clear by the flashbacks we got. The amount of support that Ram showed Rem was phenomenal and an amazing display of love. The adorable little kid was so wholesome. I loved all the flashback scenes we got with Ram and Rem. Ram was the most adorable little bundle of support any sister could have asked for, and Rem was extremely fortunate to have her in that time. Eventually, as we know, the village was attacked by cultists, leaving Ram and Rem as the only survivors, and Ram without her horn or her inborn powers, at least not to the extent that it was anything miraculous anymore. Now, she was far weaker than Rem, and at this point, Rem had mastered anything that Ram couldn't do with her natural talents, making Rem better at literally everything. And even though Ram lost any advantage she had as far as her ability to do physical work or anything, Ram still showed Rem a level of support that's largely unparalleled by anything else we see in the show, a level of loyalty that is something truly admirable. And Rem showed it back to her. Ram became a dependent on Rem, rather than being the older sister who was not only the biggest support beam that Rem would ever know, but also the largest hurdle that Rem could ever hope to climb or jump. And Ram went from those things to a dependent, which traumatized Rem. Although Ram overcame this adversity much easier than Rem, regaining her mental fortitude and her stoic nature relatively easily, whereas Rem was affected for years. Rem was actually traumatized by this up to the point where Subaru eventually helped her out of that hole in the show. Rem didn't have that same mental fortitude that Ram did, where she could get herself through the mental trauma it had on her. Of course, I'm not saying that either Rem or Ram is completely unaffected to this day in the anime as to what happened all those years ago, although it was clear that Ram had a recovery to the point where she was not only functional but mentally stable, whereas Rem did not have that recovery so easily. Rem blamed herself for everything that happened that day. Despite being the weakest person in the tribe and a child, she blamed herself for what happened, something that was clearly not her fault. An understandable psychological result, but all the same, something that caused her to be mentally unstable for the years to come. Now, it's obvious that both twins consider themselves to be the inferior twin, or even the inferior person. Rem idolizing Ram for her cunning, her loyalty, and her ability to overcome her adversities, as well as Ram's intelligence. whereas Rem admired Rem for her hard work and her amazing learnt skills, her ability to perform on a level that was extremely impressive considering she was relatively weak for her clan. I'd like to say now that they are both valid choices as a waifu, both having a wonderful protective nature that many of us find very attractive. Although due to Rem's mental instability, Ram told Subaru not to tell Rem the story about the red ogre who cried, due to the obvious parallels you could draw with the red and the blue ogre having to do with Rem and Ram. Obviously, the red ogre became much more like the humans so that he could become closer with them, whereas the blue ogre distanced himself from them because he didn't want to sabotage the work of that him and the red ogre did to get that friendship with the humans. Now that Ram didn't have her horn, it could be perceived that Ram is kind of like that red ogre who has more in common with the humans now. Although from a standpoint of the mental attitude of both characters, I would say Ram actually represents the blue ogre far, far, far more so. Because when you consider the story of the red ogre who cried, it starts from the perspective of the red ogre who just wants to be friends with the humans, the red ogre who seeks approval, and the blue ogre who seeks to find a way to help his friend to achieve this approval. And unfortunately, the friendship is kind of burned from that attempt because it would be sabotage after the plan for the red ogre to beat up the blue ogre to get him out of the village. If the blue ogre came back to be friends with the red ogre, it would be clear that there was something going on here, and it would sabotage the trust the humans developed for the red ogre. Now, in the story of Ram and Rem, Rem is the one seeking approval, trying to please people and to live up to the expectations everyone has of her due to her amazing sister Ram. And unfortunately, eventually, Ram not only loses her horn, but all of the people that Ram was seeking to please were murdered by these cultists. Not only could Ram not use her powers anymore and lost her advantage as someone who was able to help Rem in the same way, like the blue ogre lost its advantage to help the red ogre, but now Rem, the one I'm saying more so represents the red ogre, no longer had these people that she was trying to please. Ram was never particularly shown to care that she was so powerful, and she was far less affected by everything that happened than Rem. I think it was clear that her standpoint from the very beginning was much more grounded, as the person she loved most was the person who could care the least about her powers, Rem. Rem would have loved Ram either way, but the entire village, at first, them being twins, which was taboo and not really something permitted, they were both hated at first, and the only reason they were allowed to really live, even, was because of Ram's power. So Ram, I'm sure, was fully aware that the entire village only loved her because she was an anomaly, something special. And yet, aside from that, she loved Rem most, because Rem cared for her as a sister. But due to Rem's mental instability, Rem winds up killing Subaru because his smell resembles that of the cultist who killed all of her people. She killed Subaru because he smelt bad. He smelt like something that reminded her of this trauma, and she killed him because of it. Keep that in mind. Crazy likes Rem, and Rem likes crazy, just a little bit too much. I feel like Ram is a much rarer kind of character in anime. We get yanderes all the time. We get crazy all the time. Ram is calm, collected, intelligent, and stoic. And if you really pay attention to the character, she's loving and supportive all at the same time. The fact that she loves Rem as much as she does and treats Subaru the way she does just shows that, in my opinion, she's a good judge of character. From the very beginning, Ram understood the lesson taught in the parable of the red ogre who cries. She understood the value of people who truly care for you as you are. Whereas for Subaru to kind of teach Rem the same lesson and importance of that story without really telling her the story because Ram told her not to, Subaru ended up trying multiple times, having multiple failed attempts in which the consequence was death. Ram was fine without her horn because she had Rem. and she found other people who cared for her for who she was. Hence, her mental trauma was extremely easy to let go of because she still had what was most important, and she understood that. But for Rem had lost everything. From Rem's perspective, Rem was destroyed, and it traumatized Rem to the extent that she couldn't really understand why Ram recovered. She couldn't see that Ram recovered, and hence she never did. Ram understood the importance of someone who truly cares for you even when she had her horn, because Ram had the example. Ram knew the people who cared for her because of her natural talent, and Ram knew probably her parents and Rem who cared for her out of a loving bond, not something that she could do. So Ram had this parallel where she could draw, and Ram was able to know this is what true friends are like. Whereas Rem had no such example. The only people who cared for her were people who cared for her because of who she was, her family and her sister. No one else cared for her for those fake reasons, so for her to draw those parallels, I imagine, was much more difficult. Once Rem finally starts to understand that Ram has largely recovered from everything that happened, Rem then can start healing too. But keep in mind, that took multiple attempts from Subaru, multiple deaths. And Ram showed this mental fortitude, this strength, from a very young age. Some could argue say that it's wisdom, and yet she also shows herself to be very loving and supportive in nature. And we get to see this a lot when she's teaching Subaru how to read and write. She gets laid back, she gets comfortable, and we get to see her in much more of a natural setting where if you can say that Ram has no personality, I believe you weren't really paying attention to those scenes. It was amazingly supportive and adorable to see Rem and Ram holding Subaru's hands while he was sleeping, and he had kind of that vision of it happening where eventually he died and he came back trying to figure out who it was, grabbing both of their hands, realizing it was them. And when Rem dies for the first time and we see Ram kind of go off the rails a little bit, Ram goes insane, and she's out for vengeance, and she's out to understand what happened to her sister. Even in all of her anger and her fit of rage, she wants to understand, and her logic is still an important factor to her, where if Subaru could have explained what was happening to her, she probably would have calmed down and understood, because she's not mentally unstable. She just watched her sister die, and that is the only time in the series, through Season 1, that we see Ram become angry in a fit of rage like that. Whereas Rem became angry in a fit of rage because of the way Subaru smelt. He reminded her of the people who killed her entire family, and remind you, Rem and Ram could both smell this, I'm sure. It just made Rem kill him, whereas Ram just didn't like him because of it, because Ram was honest. Rem deceptively made him think that she liked him. She was manipulative, deceptive, and murderous. And that is not attractive to me. Rem tried killing him over a damn foul smell, whereas Ram is unforgivably honest. She mentions to him that he smells foul. Whereas Rem will be nice to you, deceiving you and manipulating you to get you into a private situation where she can kill you. And it's so perfectly synthetic that it's almost sociopathic the way that Rem could deceive Subaru so accurately. I mean, most of us were sold that Rem was starting to like Subaru before we saw her kill him for the first time. That was a bit of a shock to most of us, I imagine, because Rem was so good at putting up that act. The only way that Subaru survived Rem's manipulative and deceptive schemes was to literally use knowledge from beyond his own grave. Stop simping for the class yandere and think. Ram is more supportive, and she's got her shit together. She's honest, intelligent, loving, and has a strong, fortified mind. Ram is subjectively a better waifu from a logical perspective than Rem is. Now, I'd like to say I think they're both kind of B-tier waifus. I wouldn't put Rem up there with the great waifus, and I wouldn't put Ram up there with the great waifus. I think Holo is a better waifu. I think Zero 2 is maybe a better waifu. I think Robin from One Piece is likely a better waifu from the things I've heard. There are plenty of other better waifus. I'm saying that for me personally, I enjoy Ram's character and her waifu status material much more than Rem's, and I can say that it's genuinely attractive sometimes, whereas Rem is attractive on a cutesy anime girl level, and beyond that, kind of off-putting in her ability to be deceptive and manipulative. Now, do I think that Rem is a better choice for Subaru than Ram? Yes, because Subaru is a piece of trash, and he doesn't deserve Ram. He doesn't deserve Rem, for that matter. But Rem actually loves Subaru, and that is shown throughout the anime. So, if Rem wants Subaru, Rem should get Subaru. She should get what she wants. But for me personally, as a waifu material, I would say Ram is much more appealing. A huge thank you to my patrons. Justin and Molitar, the gods of change. You two are helping me so much. You have no idea how much it means to me. Wheelku, you were my very first patron. You gave me so much inspiration to push harder on this channel and to make sure that I'm doing my best to deliver the content that I know I can. Neometra and Nish, you two are also amazing. The fact that I'm getting this level of support from already multiple people is something that's inspiring me, and it's making me just feel so appreciative that I have this great community I can be a part of. Really, I have to say thank you to everyone in the Diet Weeb Discord community, and everyone in my community as well. All of you mean so much to me. We're almost at 60 subscribers. It was just a couple days ago that we hit 50, and I'm so ready for the triple digits. Let's get to 100. We can do it, guys. This has been Kaihen. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the way down. Cue the outro.